Matt left. Just like that. No screaming, no dramatic storm out, no fiery finale. One calm, almost casual sentence, and Jasmine's world shattered into pieces. Her American dream, her hopes, the man she had trusted to be her anchor, gone. And suddenly, she was completely alone in a country that was supposed to be her new beginning. Imagine flying across the world, leaving everything familiar behind, believing in a love that promised security, stability, and a future. Then, in a single moment, that promise evaporates. That's exactly what happened here. Jasmine, who had fought visa delays, sacrificed relationships back home, left children behind, and sold herself the fantasy of Matt being the one, suddenly faced a terrifying reality. Nothing mattered anymore. And the kicker? Cameras kept rolling. Crew watched as her carefully built life unraveled before them. Public saw only fragments, dramatic edits designed to make the story palatable. But off-camera, Jasmine's collapse was total. Every emotional shield she had constructed over the years, pride, fury, determination, crumbled. She wasn't angry, at least not in a way the cameras could capture. She was broken, trembling, trying to breathe through a pain so raw it defies description. Why did it come to this? How did a relationship that started with so much hope deteriorate into silent devastation? What signals were missed, what arguments left unresolved, what emotions ignored until the pressure became unbearable? And most importantly, what happens to someone like Jasmine, whose legal status, livelihood, and dreams were tied to the man who just walked away? For the viewers, this moment is pure shock value. For Jasmine, it's survival. Every heartbeat, every sleepless night, every panicked thought about deportation or losing everything she had sacrificed began in this instant. Alone in a foreign apartment, facing the silence Matt left behind, she had to confront the unimaginable, building a life from ashes she never anticipated having to collect. And here's the question that will haunt her for days, weeks, maybe months. How do you survive when the person you trusted the most becomes the reason you feel invisible, helpless, and trapped in a life you thought you had earned? Will Jasmine find the strength to stand again, or will the American dream she chased turn into a nightmare she can't escape? Jasmine stepped off the plane full of hope, a suitcase in one hand and dreams in the other. America wasn't just a country for her, it was proof. Proof that she had survived, that she mattered, that she could finally leave behind heartbreak, disappointment, and the chaos of her past. Every visa delay, every long argument with Matt, every night spent wondering if she'd even make it, it all led to this moment. She was here in a brand new world, ready to start over. But reality hit faster than she expected. The apartment, which she had imagined as a cozy nest for two, felt cold and foreign. Matt, who in her mind was a safe harbor, carried an energy she didn't recognize. He was distant, careful with his words, almost like he was measuring every response. And Jasmine, who had spent months surviving emotional storms, immediately sensed the tension. Every sigh, every glance that lingered a second too long, every delayed text triggered a cascade of anxiety she could not control. Her fantasy of fiery romance and warm embraces quickly collided with a life built on logistics, obligations, and invisible rules. Morning coffees were quiet, walks felt calculated, and conversations felt like walking on eggshells. She had fought so hard for this life, yet it suffocated her. And the cracks started showing, not in a grand explosion, but in whispers and silences that only someone hyper-aware of emotional shifts could notice. Jasmine asked questions Matt didn't answer. She sought reassurance he didn't offer. And the more she reached, the more he recoiled. Tension was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but Jasmine felt it in every nerve. She began to question herself, her worth, her decisions. Was it her fault that Matt seemed so distant? Had she misread him, miscalculated her timing, misjudged this entire relationship? And then came the nights that felt heavier than the days. The unspoken tension, the lingering doubts, the quiet withdrawal, everything pointing toward an invisible edge. Jasmine didn't know it yet, but this was the calm before the storm. The hallway moment, the tipping point where words wouldn't matter and silence would speak louder than any confession, was quietly approaching. Could she survive what was coming, or would the pressure of love, expectation, and a life built on someone else's decisions finally break her? The days in that apartment started to blur into one another. Wake up, argue, apologize, pretend nothing happened, repeat. Every morning, Jasmine braced herself for another subtle withdrawal. Every night, she relived the same silent battles. It wasn't dramatic fights or slammed doors that defined this stage of their relationship. It was the quiet, creeping pressure, the tension that wrapped around them like invisible chains. Matt pulled back without explanation. Texts went unanswered for hours, small gestures of affection became rarer, and when he did speak, it was clipped, almost robotic. He didn't yell, he didn't storm, but the absence of warmth hit harder than any argument ever could. Jasmine, on the other hand, spiraled. Every pause, every hesitant glance, every half-smile from him felt like rejection. Her chest tightened, her mind raced, and she found herself questioning her worth, her choices, and whether she had ever truly understood the man she loved. Dependency started to take hold. Jasmine had built her identity around Matt being her safe harbor. Her entire vision of the future, her life in America, her stability, her dreams, relied on his commitment. When he withdrew, it wasn't just love that she felt slipping away, it was her sense of self. And she clung harder, asking questions, seeking reassurance, testing his limits, trying to pull him back into the world she had imagined for them. But every pull pushed him further away. The cycle intensified. Arguments flared over small things, a missed chore, a forgotten text, a lingering look at something else. Apologies followed, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, but the comfort was fleeting. Matt didn't know how to stay present in the storm, and Jasmine couldn't stop feeling the waves crash over her. What made this even more devastating was how normal it seemed on the surface. To a visitor, they looked like a couple negotiating the usual ups and downs. But the real story was underneath, a slow burn of unmet needs, growing frustration, and silent desperation. Each day, Jasmine's panic escalated, her mind filling with worst-case scenarios. Would he leave? Could she survive if he did? And most hauntingly, did he already want to? The psychological tension was brutal. She was trapped in her own mind, cycling through fear, hope, and anger, while Matt navigated his own quiet withdrawal. It was a delicate dance of avoidance and confrontation, a push and pull that neither fully understood. Every emotional misstep amplified the stakes. Every unanswered question widened the gap between them. And the question lingered, impossible to ignore. Would Matt stay, or was he already gone? The audience is left watching the tension tighten like a noose, knowing something is about to snap, but unsure when, where, or how. Jasmine tried to adapt, tried to convince herself she was overreacting, tried to control the uncontrollable. But love tied so tightly to survival, to identity, to a future that only existed in her mind doesn't bend easily. Pressure cooker was about to explode, and neither of them was ready for the fallout. It started with a simple question. Do you still love me? Jasmine had asked it before, countless times, in whispers, in tears, in the middle of arguments. Usually Matt would answer, vaguely or carefully, keeping the peace. But this night was different. That question hung in the air, stretched thin like a taut wire, until it almost vibrated with tension. Matt didn't answer right away. He hesitated. And that pause, just a few seconds but it felt like hours, was the first crack in everything Jasmine thought she knew. Her chest tightened. Her hands shook. Her mind tried to reason, to convince herself he was only tired, only stressed, only needing space. But instinct told her otherwise. She felt it deep in her bones. This was more than distance. This was the moment that would change everything. Jasmine's breakdown was quiet at first. She sank to the floor, knees to her chest, trying to catch her breath. Gasping, clutching herself, she realized she had nothing left to hold on to. Her identity, her dream, her carefully built life in America, all hinged on someone who was slowly stepping away. And Matt didn't reach for her. He didn't kneel, didn't comfort, didn't try to soothe. He simply watched, silent, conflicted, but firm in his exhaustion. He had already decided. And then he spoke, in a calm, almost detached tone that made the words feel heavier than any scream could have been. He was done. He didn't want to continue. He didn't see a future. He didn't feel love anymore. Every sentence, carefully measured, landed like bricks, crushing the fragile structure of Jasmine's hope. Jasmine froze. Her mind tried to reject the truth. Her lips whispered no, 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 but it wasn't anger. Not even heartbreak. It was disbelief. It was the kind of quiet terror that steals your breath, that turns familiar walls into alien territory, that makes every sound outside echo like judgment. She was trapped, not just in an apartment, but in a life that no longer had any promise. Time lost meaning. Minutes bled into each other. The apartment, once a symbol of victory, now felt like a cell. Her tears streamed silently at first, then jaggedly, until she was shaking, gasping, as though the very act of breathing was a betrayal to the love she had clung to. Matt turned, picked up his keys, and left. No dramatic exit. Just silence and a click that sealed her fate. The hallway was empty. Her future uncertain. The question loomed over her like a storm cloud. How do you survive when the person you depended on most decides to disappear, quietly, deliberately, leaving you to pick up pieces that weren't even yours to begin with? What will Jasmine do now, alone, in a country that feels more like a cage than a dream? Will she crumble completely, or is there a way to rebuild before the world sees her weakest moment? The apartment was silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, oppressive kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel like a decision. Jasmine sat on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the wall where Matt's shoes once lined up, where small touches of his life lingered like ghosts. Each echo of the past reminded her that everything she had built her life around was gone. Sleep became impossible. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with the hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic, and the relentless loop of what-ifs in her mind. What if Matt never comes back? What if the US sends her home? What if she had misjudged everything? Every question carved deeper into her chest, leaving her breathless, anxious, and trembling. She hadn't eaten much. A few bites of fruit here and there, but the kitchen felt foreign, almost hostile, like a place that reminded her she was no longer in control. She checked her phone constantly, hoping for a message, any sign that the man who once defined her world might still care enough to return. None came. And with each silent notification, the walls seemed to close in further, pressing her against the reality she didn't want to face. She was alone, legally, emotionally, and practically. Her identity, tied so tightly to Matt, began to dissolve. She had sacrificed family, friends, her previous life in Panama, all for a dream that vanished in a single moment. The woman who believed she could survive anything now questioned whether she could survive herself. Every accomplishment, every plan, every sacrifice felt meaningless in the absence of the person she believed gave them value. Fear became a constant companion. Not just heartbreak, but the very real possibility of losing her visa, her right to stay in the country, her ability to rebuild. Panic whispered in her ears every time a door clicked, every time she passed a neighbor in the hallway. "If he doesn't want me, I disappear," she whispered aloud, trembling. The apartment, once a symbol of victory, now felt like a cage. How does someone survive when everything they believed in, everything they depended on, everything that gave their life structure is suddenly out of reach? How do you breathe when the ground under you has vanished? She considered asking for help. She thought about reaching out to producers, friends, anyone who could anchor her. But trust had slipped through her fingers. Asking felt like admitting weakness, like admitting she couldn't handle the life she had fought so hard to create. And yet, the fear of staying completely alone, unraveling without anyone to stop it, gnawed at her relentlessly. The days bled into one another. Silence, tears, pacing, shallow sleep, and empty meals. Every passing hour carried the question. Could she reach out before despair consumed her, or would she sink entirely into the void Matt left behind? Would she find a lifeline, or would the isolation crush her before anyone could intervene? While the world watched the glossy, edited version of Jasmine and Matt's unraveling, the truth behind the cameras was far less glamorous and far more disturbing. Production crew, seasoned in capturing chaos, sensed the tension before Jasmine herself fully did. They hovered like silent vultures, waiting for the perfect emotional collapse that would make for primetime television. But what viewers never saw was the tug-of-war happening off-screen, where Jasmine fought not just for her relationship but for her dignity. From the moment she arrived in the US, producers framed her as volatile, needy, dramatic, a character mold they could carve into a storyline. They nudged arguments forward with leading questions, exaggerated moments of silence, and subtle replays of Matt's doubts in front of her. Off camera, Jasmine noticed the pattern. Whenever she hesitated before answering, boom, a boom mic dipped lower, a camera lens zoomed in, waiting for tears that would validate the narrative. But as the relationship deteriorated, Jasmine began to resist. She stopped giving big reactions. She stopped feeding them emotional sound bites. There were days she shut her bedroom door, whispering through the crack, "No filming today." What viewers never knew is that production tried to coax her out with promises of setting the record straight or telling her side, but her intuition kept screaming that any vulnerability she offered would be weaponized. One particular moment, pulled entirely from the final cut, showed Matt expressing uncertainty in a quiet, exhausted tone. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes, not from rage but from fear. Cameras circled her like sharks. She pushed them away, whispering, "Please stop. This isn't for TV." That footage never aired. It didn't fit the fiery persona they'd built around her. Meanwhile, social media erupted with one-sided takes, memes, and armchair psychoanalysis, all based on a curated version of reality. The world saw Jasmine, the dramatic fiancé, but behind closed doors was Jasmine, the terrified immigrant, trying desperately to hold on to a life she had built on hope. And as the show marched on without mercy, Jasmine found herself facing a question no camera could help her answer. If she refused to play the role they scripted for her, how would she regain control of her life now that her story was already being told without her? In the quiet aftermath of everything, after the cameras left, after Matt walked out, after the last echo of their arguments faded, Jasmine found herself sitting in a silence she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peaceful. It was raw. It was the kind of silence that forces a person to confront the pieces of themselves they abandoned along the way. At first, she didn't know where to begin. Her identity had been so tightly intertwined with Matt, his moods, his validation, his affection, that she had forgotten who she was without him. She replayed their months together in her mind like a broken reel, every apology, every panic spiral, every desperate attempt to hold the relationship together. And somewhere inside all those memories, she saw the version of herself she had lost, the woman who once dreamed boldly, trusted her instincts, and believed she deserved love that didn't make her shrink. The rebuilding didn't come in dramatic breakthroughs. It came in small, painfully honest reflections, admitting she had ignored red flags, acknowledging how her fear of abandonment shaped her reactions, realizing that she had given someone else the power to define her worth. Each revelation stung, but also freed her just a little more. She started journaling late at night, writing truths she had never spoken out loud. She reached out to a few people she trusted, quietly, cautiously. And slowly, Jasmine began to see that what felt like the end of her story might actually be the beginning of something she'd never allowed herself to imagine. A life built on her own strength instead of someone else's approval. For viewers, her journey becomes more than a breakup narrative. It becomes a mirror. How often do people stay in relationships because the fear of being alone is louder than the truth of being unhappy? How often do we confuse intensity for love or sacrifice our own boundaries just to keep someone from walking away? Jasmine's emotional collapse isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that love without self-respect becomes self-destruction. Yet even as she grows stronger, one question lingers in her mind like a shadow at the edge of the room. Will she ever return to the life she once knew, or is she meant to create an entirely new one from the ashes of everything she lost? When the camera turned on for her final interview, Jasmine looked at the lens without makeup, without performance, only truth in her eyes. She spoke slowly at first, her voice shaky, then steady as memories unfolded. She admitted she ignored warning signs, she allowed fear to shape her choices, she surrendered her sense of self for the promise of love and belonging. She said she regretted the nights spent pleading for reassurance, the way she stifled her instincts because she believed being loved meant sacrificing herself. Then she paused, as if weighing the world, and said that ending the story was never easy, but reclaiming her identity felt urgent. She described the emptiness she carried after Matt walked away. That apartment no longer felt like home. It echoed with silence and regret. She buried grief in late-night tears. She replayed broken promises like a loop she could not stop. She confessed she feared losing her legal status, feared returning to a life she once left behind, feared being defined by a heartbreak rather than by her strength. Yet somewhere in that fear she discovered a hardened softness, a resolve built out of pain and clarity. She said she realized her value didn't depend on someone else telling her she mattered. She remembered what it felt like before love became survival. She started small, reminding herself of the woman she was before the flight, before the visa, before the dependency. She remembered courage, self-worth, dignity. She spoke of forgiveness, not for Matt, but for herself. Forgiveness for believing, for hoping, for loving too hard. Her eyes filled once more, but this time there was no collapse. This time her tears carried something different, quiet strength. She said she wasn't finished. She wouldn't disappear. She planned to rebuild. Not the fairy tale she lost, but a life rooted in truth, respect for her feelings, and boundaries she forgot she deserved. She said maybe she would go back home. Maybe she would stay. But either way, she'd define herself. Her final words to the camera weren't dramatic. She didn't vow revenge. She didn't promise grand success. She whispered hope. She said surviving this heartbreak wasn't enough anymore. She wanted healing. She wanted peace. She wanted ownership of her story. If you've ever stayed somewhere, some relationship, some hope, out of fear, out of desperation, out of longing rather than love, maybe Jasmine's story should make you question what you really hold on to. 'Cause sometimes ending isn't weakness. Sometimes ending becomes the beginning of finding yourself again. Now the real question hovers. Where does Jasmine go from here? Will she pull herself back to the life she once imagined or build an entirely new one from the ashes? Watch what happens next. As Jasmine's story settles into this uneasy new chapter, the emotional shockwaves don't stop with her. Because while she rebuilds, another 90-day fiancé couple is quietly spiraling toward their own breaking point, one that the cameras captured but not the way you think. Their private messages, off-screen fights, and secret deal with producers paint a picture far darker than what aired. And the twist? Their downfall started for the exact same reason Jasmine's did: love built on imbalance.